Now, there's a very long and kind of interesting history of the use of gastric juices. Okay, I know the term might make a few people queasy, but gastric juices to promote tissue healing and repair. Now, there's a whole history of focusing on gastric juices, or at least the stomach environment, for keeping given tissues alive so that they can be repaired later. I know this sounds a bit gruesome, but one can find in the historical medical literature instances of people, say, severing off a finger or even a hand or things of that sort, and then it being placed by a surgeon, of course, or in some cases these were battlefield situations, into the gut as a way to preserve that finger or hand and keep it alive, essentially, and then to graft it back on, or to make an attempt to graft it back on so that the person could then use those fingers or that hand again. And while not always successful, it was clear, or at least the idea started to form, that tissues that were placed inside the milieu of the gut stood a better chance of being grafted back on. Now, you could think of a number of different factors that could impact the improved grafting of tissues placed in the gut until the graft could take place. It could be the heat of the environment. It could be the fact that the hand or finger is not exposed to things out in the world, so less bacteria, etc. Nonetheless, physicians were intrigued by the idea that maybe something within the gut itself, and in particular within gastric juices, were beneficial for preserving and maybe even rejuvenating tissues. That said, within the community of people that use BPC-157 for therapeutic reasons, for tissue rejuvenation and repair, there's sort of been an ongoing debate as to whether or not you can take it systemically, that is, to inject it or even take it orally, and that it will find the site of injury, right? It'll go direct itself to the site of injury, or whether or not it's more beneficial to inject it directly to the site of injury. And here there's really no formal science. I want to be really clear. When we talk about BPC-157, we can look to a pretty large literature of peer-reviewed studies dating back to about 1993 is when the first kind of rigorous study of BPC-157 really began. And there are a lot of studies in rats, in mice, and a few other species as well. To my knowledge, there is only one study on humans, and it's not a clinical trial. And frankly, it's not the best performed study, and that's putting it mildly. It's more kind of self-report of people recovering from a given injury, whether or not they took BPC-157 or they didn't. So when we talk about BPC-157, we're talking about a pretty unusual circumstance whereby many, many people are now taking it. Very likely hundreds of thousands, perhaps even now into the millions. But we actually have essentially no human data as to how BPC-157 works in humans and why it does seem, because this seems to be the quote-unquote anecdata, to accelerate healing of a variety of different injuries. Okay, so it's an unusual circumstance, and it's kind of an unusual thing for us to talk about here on the podcast.